Hello, this is Stuart at creativeXP, and thanks for joining me as I look back on some of my personal gaming highlights from the last year. These are the games that I've enjoyed playing in 2022, categorised into different themes. Expect a mixture of genres and some games from past years to make an appearance as I catch up on my backlog, or just enjoy a trip down memory lane. With that said, let's jump into our first category and look at the games which presented a great story. But don't worry, this video is going to be spoiler free. It's been a great year for strong narrative games, with paid-back indie titles providing excellent written adventures and AAA releases that presented high-fidelity stories in impressive blockbuster fashion. I kicked off 2022 by getting embroiled in the intriguing world of Inscription, where I enjoyed competing against the unsettling Leshy to escape his punishing card games and trickery. The sense of discovery and frequent reversals of fortune present in the game's central deck-building gameplay was mirrored in the evolving narrative that constantly revealed new twists and surprises as you progressed. Each reveal provided a lesson about the world that the player inhabited, or information that would eventually lead to escaping the grasp of Leshy's creepy, disembodied hands. More recently, I've played Immortality, which also presents a game and story structured around discovery and piecing together information in order to progress. At the heart of this game is a brilliantly produced collection of archival film footage that the player must analyse to reveal what happened to Marissa Marcel, the star of each film. Clues are revealed non-sequentially based on what the player chooses to inspect in each reel. The result is that the player slowly begins to weave their own narrative about what the plot of each film is, what's happening in the years between each film's recording date, and how this all combines to reveal the answers to the mystery. What begins as a seemingly standard investigation gradually reveals deeper narrative layers that become more unusual, metaphorical, and horrifying, with each layer symbiotic with those above as the player continues to scratch beyond the surface. It really is a fascinating endeavour. I only wish that the experience of playing the game lived up to the creative flair and proficiency with which the scenes were produced. As it happens, the laborious task of scrubbing through the unintuitive controls and interface was more overriding than my desire to continue revealing new layers to the mystery, and I eventually abandoned the game. Of all the games that I played this year, I found Citizen Sleeper to be a standout as something that felt novel in every sense of the word. Exploring the dilapidated space station of Erland's Eye, meeting its many denizens, and eking out any chance for survival is all presented wonderfully through efficiently illustrative writing. Borrowing mechanics from tabletop RPGs, you perform actions based on the roll of a die. This makes your decisions fraught with risk and the likelihood of failure, surprise, or betrayal at each turn. It adds an engaging desire to keep playing just one more day to right the wrongs of yesterday, or discover if that person is going to follow through on their promise to help you, or not. This simple gameplay and the intentionally distant player view of the space station allows the writing to take centre stage, inviting the player to imagine the squalor and bustle of each district of the ring. The result is a story that will be unique for each player. Having completed the game in a matter of hours, I could have easily played all over again with a new character that went on an entirely different journey. However, so absolute and emotional was my experience and the conclusion of my story, that I felt replaying the game would risk diminishing this tale as a piece unto itself. I had my story upon the station of Erland's Eye, and I'm happy knowing that there are many more stories waiting to be told in the world of Citizen Sleeper for other players to discover for themselves. In this next category, we're going to look at some of the games that I like to refer to as podcast games. These are the games that I put on to relax with at the end of the day, so it's all about laid-back challenge, simple inputs, and zen-inducing gameplay. You won't find much story or voiceover in these games that would distract me from whichever podcast I'm listening to at the time. A perfect example of a podcast game is Dorf Romantic, with its simple tile-based world-building gameplay, stress-free structure, and adorably quaint aesthetics. Freely spinning a tile and snapping it into place has a wonderfully tactile sensation, and the gradual evolution of your toy-sized world feels joyful as you successfully match tiles together. In a similar fashion, plotting roads and traffic signals in mini motorways also has a playful sensation as the abstract roadways stretch and curve to your will with a satisfying pop. Although a few years old now, the perfectly honed interactions, quick game length, and minimalist design and aesthetics provides a timeless game experience that makes this an ideal podcast game that I keep returning to. That said, when those traffic jams start backing up, it can take you out of that zen state of mind as you frantically pause the game and redesign your city layout to get those cars to their destination in time. If it's a flow state I want, there are better suited games that I can easily lock into. Metal Hellsinger really nailed it, as everything melts away and I lock into the beat of the music to dispatch the demons of hell. However, listening to the music is integral to this gameplay, so that rules this out as a podcast game. Luckily, there is another game with metal connotations that is a perfect fit for podcast listening. Long gone are the days where I could spend my time errantly throwing myself downstairs on a skateboard. But thankfully Session has arrived out of early access this year to help me relive my youthful recklessness without making my ankles any worse. It's been great firing up the game, putting the headphones on, finding a new spot in the world, and just focus on practicing a line over and over again until I land that trick perfectly. Admittedly, half of the battle is contorting my hands in just the right position to pull off the maneuver successfully, as the controls are anything but simple, but they do a good job of replicating the athletic coordination required to fling and flip a board beneath your feet in reality. There is one game that hits all the notes of a podcast game, and that would have to be Vampire Survivors. With such a simple conceit and the most minimal of input required, this game seems made for filling time whilst you do something else, like listen to a podcast, or watch TV, or perform open heart surgery. And yet, beneath this simplistic veneer lies a fantastically engaging game with incredible depth and replayability. Not to mention the sheer awe and excitement that comes from leveling your character to the heights of unstoppable power, laying swathes to an impossible number of enemies on screen, only to be foiled by your hubris as you overreach for one more power-up. Oh well, better cash in your rewards and start again. The experience is frankly ludicrous, and it makes a mockery of typical game progression or structure, instead relying on rapidly delivering rewards to provide a sustained hit of dopamine at ever-decreasing intervals. The whole thing feels like a casino slot machine that you found the cheat codes for. It's incredible. I can't get enough of it. Where was I? Oh yeah, so up until now I've focused on games that are predominantly single player. But what about all those games that offer a great multiplayer experience? Well, don't worry, I've got it covered with this next category. As a big fan of multiplayer shooters, it was surprising to see a distinct lack of games in this genre as I look back on my gaming catalogue this year. This isn't a bad thing and perhaps speaks more to my changing gaming habits rather than an indication of a lack of enjoyable games released this year. I should point out that it was good to revisit the original Wolfenstein Enemy Territory in the spring with its free release on Steam, if only for a few nostalgic rounds of action. Speaking of nostalgia, playing through Shredder's Revenge with friends in a single evening was a great experience that brought some invigorating tweaks to the old side-scrolling beat-em-up format. It was suitably chaotic, at times thanks to the presence of multiple players, as we mashed out combos and spammed the taunt button to build up our specials, much to the enjoyment of our voice chat. For a more sedate experience, Escape Academy was on hand to provide some more intellectual entertainment. Playing couch co-op with my partner felt like the only way to play this game as we both scrambled to solve the charming puzzles together. A few indecipherable puzzles and interfaces aside, this short game recreated the excitement of solving an escape room with pleasing results. Now, if there was ever a scenario that would represent the pinnacle of escaping a bad situation, it would probably involve outrunning swarms of xenomorphs as they descend on your group from all angles. And thankfully I'm yet to encounter that scenario at the local escape room in my area, but Aliens Fireteam Elite managed to do a decent job of creating that sensation. As a game, it was largely one note in its execution, but there was still something satisfying about you and your friends sweeping through the xenomorph-infested locations, churning through bullets to the percussion of the iconic pulse rifle and smart guns of the Colonial Marines arsenal. The experience is definitely enhanced by playing with friends, and the relative ease with which you complete objectives and move through the linear corridors means that you can often blast away whilst chatting about what you all watched on TV last night. Rather than see this as a bad thing though, I think this is a trend that more games in the market are starting to fulfill, providing a shared group activity that serves as the background for what is now playable chat rooms. And of course, you can always break from the conversation to slip in your favourite movie quotes as you roleplay and voice chat to bring you back to the action.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
That may be the case, Hudson, but not necessarily for the games in this next category. Despite some intriguing concepts or enjoyable gameplay, I've stopped playing them for now, but I haven't fully committed to uninstalling them just yet as I still consider returning to them at some point soon. This includes early access games such as Space Haven, which I picked up in the summer. This has all the makings of a game that I could see myself investing a lot of time in playing, and the initial impressions were positive. Constructing your own spaceship is already satisfying, and the game offers some great contextual scenarios for the typical scavenging runs of other colony sim games. In my short time with the game, I was yet to engage in any ship combat, and the broad objectives and technology upgrades appear to be drip feeding at a slow pace, which is partially what led me to pause the game for now. Since then, I've been keeping up with the regular updates to the game, and I'm looking forward to jumping back in on version 1.0. Rather than constructing spaceships, I also had some fun dismantling them in Hardspace Shipbreaker. Floating in zero-G, negotiating the hazards of explosive materials and rapid depressurization as you methodically carve up space drunkers all presented a fascinating and unique experience. Coupled with an interesting story about the risks of corporate control and anti-labor practices, Hardspace was a compelling game. But one that sadly felt like a chore when faced with yet another macro-class ship to deconstruct. There is some fun to be had in upgrading your gear and optimizing your strategies to efficiently dismantle each ship type. Is this combined with the zero-G gameplay, as well as the intriguing direction the story may continue that keeps the game installed on my machine for now? Just need to overcome the daunting prospect of venturing out the airlock, making the first cut on yet another vessel. In Nobody Saves the World, I quickly settled into a rhythm of ticking off challenges for each bizarre character that I unlocked. The game has been tuned to ensure that you can effectively be leveling up your character roster whatever you are doing, and yet it still does a good job of encouraging you to experiment with new characters or abilities. It was this experimentation and encouragement to discover novel playstyles by combining character abilities that made this game stand out as something worth investing more time into. That said, I wasn't entirely engaged in the mission objectives presented to me in the first few hours, and I quickly hit some quest-based progression gates that put me off at the time. I'm still curious to return to the game and see more of its bizarre and cartoony world. I get the impression that the comedic tone of the game will also be represented in the absurd combinations of abilities that are eventually possible, presumably leading to some wildly enjoyable, game-breaking shenanigans that I'd love to play with. And now for the final category. It's time to look at my overall games of the year. These are some of my favourite games that I've played in 2022, leaving lasting impressions and providing hours of enjoyment. In no particular order, let's start with a couple of games that have already appeared in some of the previous categories. Daniel Mullen's hit game Inscription appeared on many Game of the Year lists last year, and for good reason. Its novel take on the roguelike deck builder formula was exciting, toying with the player's perceptions throughout. Having played Daniel's previous game Pony Island, I was anticipating certain themes that played with the conceits of its game format, but I was still pleasantly surprised by the tweaks to the gameplay and new story beats throughout Inscription. The game frequently made me feel like I had discovered some new overpowered strategy or unlocked a card that was surely going to guarantee my victory. Despite that feeling, the game remained well balanced and still found ways to pull the rug out from under me as part of its challenge, making those victories all the sweeter by the end. Vampire Survivors created a similar sensation, building towards that moment where you feel completely invincible, yet still managed to throw new challenges at you that kept the experience engaging. Its simplicity and short runtime of 30 minutes per run made this a perfect pick up and play game morning, noon, or night. Every game felt rewarding as I discovered a new relic, character or weapon combo, not to mention the sheer joy at seeing all those chaotic sprites on screen in a fun inversion of the bullet hell concept. Eventually it all became noise and I just focused on my character in the centre of the screen as best I could and let the mayhem wash over me with glee. I often found myself in a similar focus as I zoned in on my crosshairs and the heavy metal rhythms of Metal Hellsinger, darting around the hellscape arenas and dodging demons in my peripheral. Here was another relatively simple game that provided a great experience without feeling unnecessarily bloated or outstaying its welcome. It was the perfect antidote to the bad taste still left in my mouth from 2020's Doom Eternal, having eagerly awaited the follow-up to 2016's Doom, one of my favourite games in recent years. Hellsinger clearly owes a debt to Doom, and whilst its level design is not as inventive or accomplished, the stripped-back gameplay still hits the right notes to make you feel like a complete badass reminiscent of the fabled Doom guy. I loved every brutal beat-by-beat encounter and separate challenge arena. In Citizen Sleeper, I felt anything but a badass as I scraped by a meagre existence of fraught survival on the space station ring of Erlin's Eye. My unfolding narrative and relationships with the various people I met here were distinct and at times emotional. Reaching my story conclusion felt incredibly satisfying, but I get the sense that this may not be the case for everyone since failure appears ever present. That said, I would happily recommend the game to anyone not put off by visual novels thanks to its rich world building, easily approachable gameplay, and enticingly minimalist style. Another game that I really enjoyed with its own unmistakably minimalist aesthetic is Art of Rally. In fact, you might be forgiven for thinking that this is a game that is all style and no substance. I mean, it's right there in the name, but looking beyond those evocative low poly models and the gorgeous landscapes in their saturated hues, you will find a game that is pure in its intentions to provide a brilliantly penned love letter to rally driving. Under the hood, there is a surprisingly efficient simulation of the physics involved with tearing through the countryside in a turbocharged hatchback, albeit stripped down to the bare essentials. The result is a satisfyingly challenging drive as you manage understeer and braking into the corners, feeling the weight of the car shift through a hairpin, feathering the acceleration and wrestling that oversteer into an impressive drift before hitting flat out again. Not since the Column McRae days on PlayStation 1 have I felt so enamoured with a rally game that makes me relish the skill and beauty of what is such a thrilling motorsport. Whether I want to take a leisurely cruise in the beautiful environments or lock in my focus to improve my course times, Art of Rally has been a pure joy to play at every turn. And I think that just about covers it. I don't think there's anything else. Oh. Right. Yeah. Elden Ring. Look, you should know I've never really been one for Souls games. I tried the original Dark Souls on a whim, and after beating the first boss after a lot of struggles, I kind of felt like I had experienced the core loop of the game. I just didn't fancy banging my head against that wall over and over again to surpass each new boss. I got the appeal, it just wasn't for me at the time. So when Elden Ring came out this year and I heard more about its open world structure, I felt curious enough to dip back in and see what all the fuss was about. And boy, was I glad I did. Exploring the vast world of Elden Ring was a surprising and hugely enjoyable experience from the outset. Each vista promised a journey of intriguing locales, terrifying monstrosities, and unexpected discoveries. It was this vastness that provided much of my enjoyment in the first half of the game, and went a long way to keeping me playing beyond that first boss encounter like last time I played a Souls game. When I did inevitably run up against those brick walls, typically in the shape of a huge sword-wielding baddie, I knew that I could just head off in any other direction and I would find something else to do to progress as I continued to level my character. All this, safe in the knowledge that I was sure to encounter something new and exciting elsewhere, and the big bad could just wait for me to return, suitably leveled up, and wiser to stomp them at a time of my choosing. Having overcome that initial hurdle in the general game loop, I started to gain a greater appreciation of the huge depth and customization available to craft your own build. I was spending hours in game trying stuff out to experiment with the various attributes, systems and items in an effort to work out how they work. I ended up spending just as much time thinking about the game when I wasn't playing as I considered where I could explore next and reading guides online. Indeed, Elden Ring is obtuse, at times to a fault. What is often lauded as intentionally hardcore just comes across as purely considered from a user experience perspective, if even considered at all. The game demands commitment from its players at all times, and often the only course of action is to commit to trying something and learn from its inevitable failure. It tends to work well to create a sense of risk-taking and rewarding discovery, but I'm not sure it needs to extend to the interface, where all you want to know is if you can level up your flask or not. Thankfully, some of these issues have been resolved with post-launch patches. Other issues, such as slightly baggy mid to late game progression, are more difficult to address with patches, since the experience becomes more linear as you enter the final marathon of later stage boss battles. That said, by this point in the game I was heavily invested in completing the game, and I still enjoyed much of the encounters. It's quite telling that after more than 120 hours in game, I still had much that I had yet to encounter in the world despite completing the final boss. Overall, Elden Ring has been a fantastic game this year that has finally brought me round to the joys and frustrations of the Souls-like. Of all the games that I've played this year, this is the one that has left the biggest personal impression and provided the greatest range of gaming memories for me as I explored and battled my way to become Elden Lord. So that finally is a wrap on my games of the year for 2022. Let me know in the comments what you would consider as your game of the year, or if you had any thoughts on the games I've mentioned in this video. For now though, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.